Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar presentation, MS SQL Server Simplified, Performance, Security, and Availability with Cloud-Agnostic Database as a Service, brought to you by Nutanix. I would like to introduce you to our presenter today, Chris Papp. Chris has 19 years of experience in IT, with most of that time spent leading and managing systems, engineering, and infrastructure teams. Chris is currently a Senior Solutions Marketing Manager for Nutanix, focusing on the Era database platform. Chris, I'd like to do a quick sound check for you, so please say hello.
Hello, and thank you for having me today.
Awesome. We can hear you loud and clear, and now I'd like to pass it off to you for the presentation.
Thank you. Let's jump right into it and what a Nutanix database solution with Era can do for SQL Server. And like what I want to start out first is, the SQL Server challenges that we see in the environment today. In my role, I get to talk to a lot of DBAs and a lot of accidental DBAs, systems engineers, and the challenges that they run into as they're scaling out their environment. And if we were to distill that into 4 areas, there's a risk, cost, complexity, and agility. And that's generally kind of universal in any database environment. But when we're looking at like a modernization effort of a database estate, specifically with SQL, we tend to, we're trying to, when we're doing any type of modernization, we're trying to lower the risk and ideally improve agility, because with the advent of the sprawling growth, explosive growth of cloud, it brings a promise of being able to answer the call of business when needed, being very fast, cost effective in the sense that it's fractional consumption. If you have more demand, you can spin up more databases, and you have that capacity to scale out and scale up, except people want that as well in their on-premises environment. The reality is, as people traditionally build out their environments, that's not the case. That risk just keeps on going up, and that risk, kind of lies in the costly outages, security risk when it comes to not being able to patch your environment effectively, and your database is going down, which affects the customer-facing applications that rely on it, those tier 1 applications that are revenue generating. Impacts the brand as a whole, and can have an effect on the stock price and the value of the business. And then the IT teams, the DBAs, are in the firing line, right? Because they're always struggling to keep up, get their head above water while they're putting out fires. That the cost of that, we talk about that, there's risk involved. The cost goes up, whenever you have downtime. You're looking at, by most conservative estimates in enterprise environments, $35,000 a minute in some cases. So when you're looking at that type of downtime, it makes sense to, like, when you're modernizing that SQL environment, or you're creating a more resilient HA environment, that you're also trying to make sure that any maintenance isn't accidentally taking it down, or like the maintenance time is at a minimum if you can resolve it. But in legacy infrastructure, that cost of downtime is not always effectively managed. And then just the traditional thing in any type of environment, that cost of space and management, as you add more servers and you add that space, data center costs skyrocket. What we like to say at Nutanix is, like, complexity is like the enemy of any database estate, and that's because it comes in several different forms. Your siloed infrastructure that your SQL Server environment's on, like, a lot of times, teams will isolate that SQL environment for the purpose of, like, trying not to mix workloads. One, because they want to make sure all the resources, the CPU, and the storage and the RAM and everything that's involved with that is dedicated to that SQL Server workload. And then, the other part of that is that, they don't want other applications stepping on that, coming across it. And so with that said, you end up having these islands of siloed resources. And so you're always having constant database ops effort. And then, anytime it comes to, like, trying to plan an upgrade or patch, or, do any type of maintenance, that complexity just skyrockets. So your effectiveness in getting it done in a short amount of time goes into goes into the weekend work, and then the chance of having an outage be much longer is much more realistic. And then last but not least, the agility. Just it takes the average database of a customer that's not running any type of database as a service, or not running any type of automation, or even if they are running automation, it's limited because it's ad hoc automation. From beginning to end can take weeks, and you have missed SLAs equal lost revenue, and just the slow response to the business, hits the bottom line. And so when we talk about, that, those problems that are in environment, the bedrock of that is infrastructure, and that complexity in a SQL environment where you're trying to have, an always-on availability group spread across different, environments. But even if you just, like, by environments, I mean availability zones, different data centers. But even when it's broken down to the most simplest, if it's still in the same data center, you still have, multiple clusters, old new workloads, specialized skills that need to have, that teams need to have. You have very purpose-built systems and long planning cycles, because you have individual storage controllers that attach to compute that's dedicated, and then you have virtualization apps on top of that. And the result of that is a lot of effort, more than you want to admit, is built on managing that infrastructure to the point of like 80%, and only 20% is spent on apps and services. And any team lead or business leader will tell you they want to flip that around. They want a lot of the effort spent on apps and services because that's what drives a business. Instead, the teams are being put into an environment or a cycle that's hard to break, where you are trying to be reactive instead of being proactive, or building a company and moving it forward. And it's because of that infrastructure complexity and the disruptiveness that we talk about, routine upgrades and just working nights and weekends, have a negative impact. So we address that in a different way at Nutanix and how it affects SQL Server, and what we call web scale architecture, or bringing cloud to infrastructure. And that's built on 4 pillars. It's hybrid converged infrastructure, and so benefits of that to databases is localized I/O for data performance. So that means that wherever your database sits on that VM, it's not going across a wire. It's not going inducing any latency when it's reaching across its data. It's staying local to that VM on that storage. So it's intelligent enough to know where that data is going to reside. And so even though it's a distributed data platform, it's going to keep that data to that SQL Server that's asking for it to it local. So you're not going to incur any latency, hence you have better performance. We're talking about software-defined intelligence. So whenever you see highly publicized security threat or vulnerability at a company where they're exposed and customer data is released, a lot of times they're targeting the database. And so we build our HCI because it's compute, virtualization, networking, and storage all built on one platform. They're not off the shelf, and it's built in a cloud format so that it's all built together and it scales out and it's software defined. So any updates, any security hardening happens at a software layer on the environment. So and we build things with security first mindset. Distributed autonomous systems, because the environment is a distributed workload, you're not having the problems you have with the legacy environment where you're a storage controller and a SAN gets pegged out, and then you have forklift upgrades to move to the next one. No, we are able to kind of distribute that out in the environment to eliminate those bottlenecks. And then we'll talk about in the next slide a little bit more, but when you have the capability of a public cloud on your on-premises data center, you now have the capability to incrementally and linearly scale out. And what we mean by that is fractional consumption. We have many SQL customers that start off small, a couple SQL servers, and scaled out over to 100 because they only scaled out as needed without these large purchases, without these forklift upgrades that they're taking downtime. So let's talk a little bit more what that means in scaling Microsoft SQL Server on the Nutanix platform. So what you're seeing in front of you right now is an actual third-party study done by ESG where they essentially they took a SQL Server workload and they started out with one, a single node, database instance, I should say. And then they started putting an actual workload to it. And then they started scaling that out by adding 2 and 3 and 4. And they actually went past 4, but for the purposes of this diagram, it was 4. But what they found was as they scaled out, there wasn't a drop. There wasn't a ceiling on performance. In fact, the average storage read latency was less than a millisecond, and the write latency was 1.59. And so what we're trying to say here is that you have web scalability. In other words, like when you're adding, you're not hitting that ceiling you would where now you've hit the performance maximums of your storage device or of your servers. You're able to, where now that you got a forklift upgrade, you're able to incrementally add more as your company is growing, as load is increasing, or seasonal workloads come in, like in a retail space, for instance, where it spikes up. You can scale up and scale down. And with that, what we do with Nutanix is because you can start small and scale up and you're not trying to do a 3 to 5 year, like buy the biggest thing that you can buy and you can afford and then grow into it in 3 to 5 years. We have unused space. You're making a much smaller purchase and using what you need and then scaling out as you grow into it. But you're not wasting any of the resources. And another benefit of that is as you're scaling, you're also getting the best technology at the time. So we have customers that started when we were 10 years ago with us, that their environment was growing, and then when the next new CPU came out or the next software update came, they were able to get the performance benefits of hardware that they were using, because we are software defined, as well as the benefits of the improvements of the software that we deploy in Nutanix, and get those benefits. So as they're scaling out, they're getting new infrastructure and they're getting the benefits of new technology as they scale out. And this is just a acknowledgement from ESG that we do what we say. We are able to scale out and keep performance high, specifically for SQL Server LTP database performance distribution. Second part of this, that when we talk about complexity being the enemy of high performing databases, the big thing to point out is there's a second part of it. It's database operations. There's the complexity of the infrastructure, and then there's complexity in management. And kind of in this diagram that we see here, like the iceberg on the water is that 90% of it is under the water surface. And so that's like the provisioning, the backup, the platform upgrades, the cloning that takes place, the resiliency that you need to have in an HA environment to make sure your data is valid and staying up to date, especially in your dev and test environments. What it means from us in those database operations is there's a lot of manual operations that exist in the day-to-day routine of a DBA or a systems administrator. The automation is time consuming, and a lot of times it's ad hoc. So what we have is a lot of individual snowflakes of configuration for SQL Server. You may have one cluster will be all the same configuration, all the same software profiles for the database, but maybe like an if it's traditional legacy setup, like an HBA that's connecting to the SAN might be a separate setting, or maybe network. There might be network differences, or on top of that, there might be compliance or security lockdowns. That might be difference between where the cluster is running fine, but it's just out of compliance from a security standpoint. And so a lot of that just creates a lot of individuality in your environment, and that's not good, because now that anytime you go to troubleshoot or there's an issue, you have a lot of different variables you have to troubleshoot and figure out what is the actual problem. And so that's where we come in terms of like database as a service, specifically with Era. We're able to come in and no matter what your environment is, we're talking about SQL Server now, but we're able to give you a centralized control plane to start off and simplify those database operations, and then automate that. What I mean by automating it is by standardizing and getting those compliances and policies built in, so where it's a wash, rinse, repeat procedure, and moving forward and doing that. And our database as a service at Nutanix is called Era. So what you're looking at right now is actually the dashboard, and it kind of gives you an entry point into your entire database estate, and you can drill into there and get like, what does my SQL Server environment look like? What patch level are they at? What versions am I running? Am I still running any 2008 R2 that's out of service? What versions of 2012? What versions, flavors of 2016 am I running? Are my clones of my production workloads being sent over to the test and dev environment or to the reporting environment? So I'm having accurate reporting on production data. This is your entry level into that. And so, we take that complexity, put it all in one spot and simplify that and remove those different variables from you with Era. And we're able to do that with what we call, 4 different pillars. Those pillars are provisioning, lifecycle management meaning patching. We have a feature called Time Machine, so that covers snapshot, clones, refresh. And what we do with that to add a little color on that is when we take these snapshots and clones, we plug into our infrastructure, our API, because Era is custom built, specific built for Nutanix architecture. And so a snapshot or a clone, which could take hours in a normal environment, it takes seconds, and it's non-performance affecting, and it saves storage capacity quite significantly. Across the board, no matter what type of database you're using, as you can see all the different databases that we support. We've had customers that have decreased their copy data storage for SQL Server by 91%. We've had customers cut their footprint of their SQL Server environment by 90 terabytes from storage, by saving 90 terabytes of storage just by using our cloning and our snapshotting for all the different copies of SQL Server out there. And then finally, last but not least, is database protection. You can take, with our cloning and snapshot technology, clone and snapshot that database, and then if you have a table that gets deleted, you can do an in-place restore on that environment effectively and quickly without having to go to your backup software to do that or taking anything offline. Or you can do a side-by-side install. If you have a down database and your HA kicks over to rebuild that instance offline, you can completely restore it, have it up, and then have it back into your replication cycle so it's running correctly. So when we're looking at running databases and supporting databases, engines on the web scale platform, using databases as a service through Era, the way that sits in the overall picture of things is that it extends our capabilities, whether it's automation, data protection, cost governance, because now you're actually able to capture those things, but it plugs into the rest of the Nutanix ecosystem in terms of what we can do. You can actually use, for instance, our Calm application that can automate application rollouts from a full LAMP stack perspective. And then when it comes to rolling out the database and that application rollout, you can it'll call out through APIs to Era to roll out that database with the correct, that SQL Server or a full-on availability group into the new environment that you're rolling out to, whether it's a lab or it's a new dev production environment. It will call out Nutanix Era to then deploy that, and then you have that capability to deploy it with your standards and your policies all built in, and have a full-on, highly available SQL Server availability group up and running, in about an hour. So there's a lot of ability and just capability in that, and we call that the automated database management from Era to control that. Again, just kind of a reiteration of simplified database operations. We're attacking the complexity that's just inherent in database operations and simplifying that and giving you a way to do it much easier. So your focus is actually on the environment and when on the application and providing services. Capability not talked about is the ability now that with Nutanix clusters and integration with Nutanix clusters on AWS and coming up soon, Azure, is the capability to now run a hybrid cloud environment on Nutanix. So you can actually have databases sitting up in public cloud and then manage both your public cloud SQL Server instances and those sitting on your local Nutanix infrastructure through Era. And so you have a single pane of glass, single view, and you manage it, and then you can extend those policies and those capabilities out, and you're managing it all with Era, and again, extending that simplification out to public cloud as well. So the existing process, when we're talking about, what we mean by like, simplifying what we're doing, we talked about like one of the big use cases of deploying SQL Server, of using SQL Server with Nutanix is deployment and provisioning, just simplifying it. And this is just a quick snapshot of what it takes and all the different touches in between, from when a request comes in to have a database provision, the customer could be the DevOps team, to and actually getting back to the customer from a request an actual database instance. You have multiple teams touching that. And it's not uncommon. This is where we get like, customers having, it could take, days or weeks to actually finalize that and have that in the customer's hand, because it's having to go not only to the database team, it's going to storage team, it's going to, possibly a separate virtualization team, definitely the network team. The compliance and security team needs to validate that now and make sure that it's up to date and it's checked off all the list. And that all those processes as it goes through, and then if something happens and not done, or something takes precedence, it could go all the way back to the beginning again. And so that's why it creates that long life cycle of getting that out the door. What we do is we're actually saving that time to do that. We save all those, and we take like that gold image. We're able to take the policies, the security policy, compliance, the storage recommendations. So this way that what is required for best practices to have a high performing SQL Server environment, what should that storage look like? How should your SQL Server database instance be spread across your storage? We can have that mapped out already through Era. And so when you deploy that, you're clicking a button, you're answering a couple of questions in the wizard when that request comes in, or you could delegate that off, because now you can set up rules so that it's done the correct way with standards to SQL Server, the best practice SQL Server, and best practices for Nutanix with your company's policies built into it. And you can have those rule sets built in to where now when they deploy it out, you can delegate that off to junior DBAs, or you can delegate with rules to, like, if it is a DevOps team that's always scaling stuff out, they can scale out t-shirt size, different types of databases, and they can roll it out. So this frees up the work involved with deploying a database. So it frees up the DBA. It answers the call of business. So you have that agility portion answered. Now you're actually starting to turn the corner in, time sunk into database operations is starting to decrease. And then you're, reducing the time to market, which is, increases the bottom line. The thing that's not talked about all this is the standardization of this. And why that's so important is anybody who's ever troubleshot an environment, or you're waiting on a team to troubleshoot an environment, if there's a lot of complexity there, or there's a lot of variables from instance 1 to instance 100, and they're all different, then that time to resolution is going to be high. And so that outage is going to take longer, that website's going to be down, that customer faces application is going to be down. So when you standardize that and you're able to get it out faster and get that database out faster, and it's always going to be high performing, but those profiles, instead of having 100 different database profiles across different flavors of databases, now they're all baked in with the correct policies and procedures. And then you can delegate those out, so there's not going to be any variables from different teams deploying things out differently. That reduces the troubleshooting that's involved. It increases the uptime in the environment. So if you roll something out into one environment and you have, like, say, a patch, you don't have an unexpected outage later on. And so you have the ability to empower other IT users to deploy databases, but within the standards of the company. And so it frees up those teams. Again, just kind of touching on a hybrid cloud database, Era can manage, and this is an example, a very simplified example of, an availability group from a lab that we were doing, in which you had a primary and a standby on premises, and then you had a replica and another standby sitting in an AWS cluster in Frankfurt. And the same would be true if you're running this eventually when we go GA with Azure. But in this example, you're managing all that with Era, and you're setting that up, and you're setting it up so now you have that availability group and you can set those up and deploy it. And the idea of it is we are calling out to the SQL Server APIs. So we're not stepping in the middle of that. We're just managing it. And then where we step into is anything that's like a snapshot, but we're still using snapshot or cloning and then our policies and for deploying. But when we do deploy, we're still using those. We're plugging into the SQL Server APIs to do that. So this kind of gives you a bird's eye view of what that looks like and managing that in the environment. Last thing I want to go over where it's a great study to look at. We have a lot of great, capabilities that are available from running SQL Server on Nutanix. But specifically, we did a total economic impact with Forrester, and so they talked to a bunch of customers, and they came back with a lot of great facts and figures validate that, but it's coming from the customer. Everything from decreased storage requirements for clones and backups, decreasing that by 60%, simpler database management, reduce the need for DBaa nights and weekends. So essentially overtime, where they were being over extended, they were able to reduce that in some of the customers by 50%. And then, the fact that we're able to automate database patching and management, we were avoiding losses of over $35,000 per hour. So a lot of great read. We have that on the nutanix.com/era website. So you can go there and actually get to the Forrester TEI report and see that. We also have on the ERA website as well the ESG report, where it kind of points out that by running SQL Server off like a legacy environment and jumping onto higher converged infrastructure, we're able to improve SQL Server transaction processing by 146%. There's some big numbers there. And also the capability of just being able to scale out and scale up is just phenomenal. Last but not least, it's, we'd like you to go out and check out Nutanix.com ERA, but also go Nutanix.com/test ERA, which is a test drive. It's the ability to go out and without setting up any infrastructure in your environment, you go out and actually test the features within ERA, deploying, backing up, refreshing a database, patching a database as well. You go out there, all the use cases in there, and walk through it, and it's guided. There's a walk me section, so you kind of know where to click. You don't have to read a big manual to go through it. Our products are built intuitively so that you can kind of figure out where to go, but we do provide that walkthrough for you. And it's a great opportunity as well to kind of see what the product does and get more firsthand experience of what we're doing. But definitely go check that out. Appreciate your time today, and make sure to go check us out. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. And with that, DZone would like to thank you for a phenomenal presentation. Secondly, DZone would also like to thank Nutanix for providing the audience with a great webinar. We hope you have a great day.